We're gonna have to think about this. We're gonna have to draw from our own personal experiences, meager as they are, guided by pop culture as they may be, so as to come to some hypothesis which is more probable than not. Now, what do we, the generation that has never bled, have to draw upon when we think about warfare? Our experience with warfare has been a disappointing one. We know it as the Cold War, which is a title which in itself is a little unromantic. Although the Cold War did experience moments of heat, such as Korea and Vietnam, it was in general a war over the hearts and minds of individuals. It was a theoretical war. It was an ideological war. It was what I call a mimetic war. Now, genetic wars in the past, warfare in the past was over resources, women being one such resource. And the same holds true today. Dominance, control over resources, power, they all come into play. But this time it's not as noble as it was in the past. There's no direct, no direct confrontation. Confrontation is the last ditch effort, or it's used as a smokescreen, often as a pretense. This is a theoretical war, like I said, an ideological war. This is about brainwashing, controlling consciousnesses, controlling how people think, how they define words, what emotional reaction they have to concepts. This is a war like no other. This is a war that may produce moments of heat, but is mostly cold, impersonal, indirect. A feminine war. Men used to fight honestly, directly. Conflict was resolved through violence. Today it's insidious, it's seductive, it's hypocritical. We might say that violence is the last thing the perpetrators of this war want, because it's here that they feel the most insecure, the most vulnerable. They want to keep this on an ideological level because they have the best chance of coming on top, particularly in a world of overpopulated uh, spaces where even those that exist would not have existed if it were not for the sheltering and the protective umbrella of the very ideology which now wages a war against uh, what is noble and what is strong and what is healthy. So they have numbers on their side. They will always be appealing to the majority. And this is why democracy for them is a must. The avoidance of conflict is a must. They must make violence something almost monstrous, although in nature it's common. They must make democracy their highest ideal, because only here can numbers overwhelm quality. Quantity can overwhelm quantity. The ancient Greek considered the ascent or descent into democracy uh, a necessary evil. They considered it a decline. And in fact, many of the famous philosophers often quoted, I will name just one, Plato. He was anti-democracy. He thought that that was the end of what he understood as his civilization. Therefore, what we have here is a shift in methodology. The goal is still the same: power, the will to power, if you will. the desire to dominate, to control, to give a higher probability of success to one's own kin, to one's own blood, to one's own children, and in this case, to one's own mindset, to one's own ideologies and ideals and principles and values. So this is a war over what we consider valuable, how we define the value, how we understand it, how we imagine it, what imagery we use to contemplate it, to control the mind and how it thinks is to control the individual. You don't need to kill the individual once you control his mind. No matter how strong he is, how big and tough and tall and beautiful, he becomes putty in your hands if you manage to insert into his mind your preferred concepts, your preferred reactions to certain words. Once you learn how to manipulate his psychology, his natural fears, his sexuality, his drive towards immortality, the desire to propagate, to continue on after death. So this is a war that has reached a level of sophistication that no man of the past could ever imagine. In the past, like I said, the warfare was direct, it was honest, it was brutal, but there was nothing hypocritical about it. Today, lies and hypocrisy are part of the warfare. And in this case, the enemy, the nihilistic enemy, is one, like I said, that wants democracy, especially once it learned how to manipulate the weakest of the weak, how it learns how to dumb down, how it learns how to retard psychology, prevent it from developing, how it when it learns how to manipulate fear and sexuality. Once it allows mutations that would not have normally been permitted to propagate, once it allows them to infiltrate a genetic pool, thusly lowering its genetic quality. Once it does all that, then all it has to do is insert into the minds of the children born a certain psychological predisposition, one which, no matter what they learn in later years, what knowledge they have, what experiences they have, it will remain with them. It will be something they will not be able to escape. It will become something innate. Because in the case of our species, the human species, development of the fetus does not end at birth. In fact, the fetus continues to develop after it is born. Even its skull only closes a few weeks after a human infant is born. So when we talk about manipulating and indoctrinating individuals, we're talking about intervening upon their development from the earliest possible time. And this is why we see that in many cases, let's use Christianity as an example, children are intervened at the earliest possible time. Whereas in the past, in the pagan societies, a child was trained after the age of 7, allowed to develop on its own up to that time. In modern cultures, what happens is the infant is intervened upon from the earliest possible time, so that its brain development can be shaped and directed as soon as possible. Let's return to our Cold War scenarios. Now, for me, for reasons I will not get into here, the Cold War was an internal struggle. The last true war was World War II. The last genetic, honest war was WW2. After that, we got the victors struggling over who will dominate, what method will be used. And of course, capitalism had the upper hand because it was more technologically advanced, not only in machinery and in production, but in technique. Technique being husbandry. They knew much more about how to manipulate fears, how to feed into sexual drives, how to guide natural predispositions towards desirable for them goals. Whereas communism remained on the more primitive Christian method, using fear and force. With Christianity, it was divine force and fear, and communism it was the state. And in both cases, the ethos, the morality, was no different. It was the same. And since we're on the subject, communism and capitalism differed in very little. They both accepted production as the highest human value, and they both preached equality, because for them productivity was the only thing that mattered. Sex didn't matter, race didn't matter, the past didn't matter. All that mattered is how productive the individual could be, or how much he could be manipulated to produce more and more. Like I said, with communism, the method was the old method of promise and fear, such as the one used by Christians and Judaism. With capitalism, it became more insidious, more sophisticated. It actually convinced the slave that he was free. It actually made slavery a virtue. It made the slave want to work. It made the work ethic something to be proud of. Capitalism also learned how to use art, how to inject the populace with ideas, how to manipulate psychologies using repetition, using constant reinforcement via music, via uh, television, via the movies, using subtlety rather than the more vulgar, more forceful methods of communism, Christianity. So it produced more stable systems. And by producing more stable systems, it produced more happy cows, more happy slaves. And so it defeated the other side uh, just through its ability to be more efficient, to use the resources it had, human beings being one of its resources, in the most effective way, more effective than communism. See, communism tried to put a wall around it so that its populace was not seduced by the West. The West didn't have to do that. It had learned how to manipulate human nature, how to feed into need, how to tweak the sexual drive. So it didn't have to put any walls. And in fact, openness was its mantra: open borders, open markets, because it knew that as you permitted mutations to propagate through the system, weeding out only the most disruptive elements, what you produced was a weaker herd, one more easily manipulated. Once you made intelligence a, uh, an insult, once you taught early on that being smart was something to be avoided, once you dumbed down the population gradually, recycling art, recycling ideologies, repeating the same messages over and over again, in that method the Russian used, Pavlov, then eventually, after a few generations, you didn't really have to use much force. You just have to intervene here and there, minimally, and using clandestine methods. But you didn't really have to use force. The herd would return to the barn every night. They would not even dream about breaking down the fences. They would not dream of going to the wild. It was so domesticated, so indoctrinated, so placated, so feminized that even the idea of freedom would scare the shit out of it. Therefore, this age we live in, this post-Cold War age we live in, is but a continuance. It's the aftermath of that conflict, that internal struggle the winning side went through, fighting over not really the principles, the shared nihilism, the shared hatred of nature, the shared hatred of life, the shared hatred of a particular tribe, a particular peoples. The last real war, like I said, was World War II, and before that it was World War One. Those were the last two wars that sort of defined the later Cold War, the victors of the Cold War, and how they fought over the scraps, what method would dominate. And like I said, communism failed because it was more primal, it was less sophisticated, less technologically advanced. And the West, having been injected with many scientists, not only in the nuclear physics, but in all areas, had developed new methods of manipulating the masses, which we know today as politics, modern politics, and as marketing. Marketing sounds like a very harmless word, but in fact it's the most conniving method of mind manipulation ever devised by man. It's called human husbandry. It has learned how to manipulate sound, texture, music, smells, how to integrate ideologies, how to induce an emotional reaction in peoples by repeating certain concepts, by connecting certain concepts with certain emotions through the pop cultural industry. Today, many people can't utter a word, certain words, without automatically, like Pavlovian dogs, reacting in an emotional way. They cannot even contemplate about certain ideas without cringing, without that emotional reaction. This is the height of human institutionalization, human husbandry, and we're living in that aftermath. We're living in the continuance of it. The Cold War was mostly, like I said, a cold war, not a warm war, not a hot war, and the same holds true today. So this is a war like no other, a war fought using methods contrary to the ones our ancestors knew. It's a more feminine, passive aggressive, but it is over the same goals, the same need to dominate. I'll give you an example. Feminism or feminists think that they're liberated from masculine power, when in fact they're not. What they're liberated from is the immediate, the intervening masculine presence, the middleman. See, in the past, because the tribe was homogeneous, that is, a warrior, a fighter, a farmer, had shared the same beliefs, the same mean, the same blood, genetics with his king. This individual was given his own little kingdom. This is why we call a family man's little kingdom, right? So when a man had a family, he perpetuated, he produced, he replicated, and he shared ideals and ideas of his tribe. In heterogeneous systems, the family, for that very same reason, becomes detrimental to internal harmony because the system wants to integrate as many people, minds into its premises as possible in the most unchallenging, harmonious way possible. How do you do that? You decrease the level of consciousness. You slander aesthetics. You make appearance accidental. You make the senses something that should be mistrusted. So in today's systems, this desire to integrate heterogeneous peoples into one cohesive whole necessitates this lowering to the lowest common denominator, human awareness, human psychology. Furthermore, by making masculinity a vile word, or deferring it, or referring it, or connecting it with feminine attributes, thusly emasculating it, making it more effete. What the system does is it eradicates a natural competitor. By eliminating a male, you eliminate the possibility of somebody challenging your authority. You eliminate a resistance to your authority. So whatever you say is accepted simply because it comes from an authority. And of course, in the more sophisticated methods, the authority doesn't come from a person, it comes from an institution. This is a form of mind manipulation. By depersonalizing it, it becomes uh, less of an imposition upon you. It becomes less insulting. So you make it about an institution. You abstract the masculine power, the authority. So then you make it less personal. And by making it less personal, you make it more likely that you will submit to it. Your resistance to whatever it says decreases simply by depersonalizing it. The institution, as I've said in other of my videos, is an abstraction of masculine alpha maleness, similar to how money is an abstraction of resources. By abstracting it, it becomes more marketable. Not only that, it becomes more codified. You can encode it, and by encoding it, you can reduce it down to a number, a word, and then you can sell it. Then even the average imbecile out there, the weakling, can hope to purchase whatever he lacks simply by acquiring the rights to it, simply by acquiring the means to purchase it and to wear it. This is why materialism becomes so important. An inferior male buys the sports car, let's say, to compensate for his inferior maleness. The inferior female purchases the makeup, the push-up bras, the girdles. She might even go as far as to get a plastic surgery to compensate for her own genetic failings. So we see how power, how virility, how beauty can be purchased. This is why they teach that all these things are skin deep, because they've been detached from their real uh, essence. What is beauty but symmetry? Symmetry exemplifying a previous genetic health. But since you can now hide it, you can mask it, uh, you can correct it surgically or using other techniques. It's all about techniques and technologies. Since you can do that, then you begin to think that, maybe it's not indicative of my overall quality. Maybe it is superficial how I look. But this is not the case, because if you're ugly, no matter how many uh, surgeries you have, how much makeup you put on, your child will inherit whatever genetics made you ugly. The past cannot be escaped. It can be dismissed, it can be ignored, it can be slandered, it can be ridiculed, but it cannot be escaped. Your past is what determines everything about you. Everything you are now is based on everything that preceded your emergence. Not only your own personal experiences, but everything that preceded your very birth, the experiences of your parents, the experiences of their parents, all participate in what you look in the mirror, in how you feel, in your propensity to uh, be intelligent and willful, or to be weak and stupid. All these are participating in you, no matter how many masks you wear and how many new designs you put on, or how many motorcycles you drive, or how many mansions you buy. They are there forever. When we speak of a war like no other, we must imagine it as best we can as a new Cold War. But even worse, it's an undeclared war. It's a war that has started long, long time ago. It's a war that produced both world wars and many secondary wars around the world. And it's continuing, because we have to think, if we're a weak people, a weak tribe, in fact, our weaknesses are our biggest source of pride. Our meekness, our feebleness, our suffering is what defines us. If that is how we identify, then the enemy is something so powerful that we can't deal with it directly. So, how could we deal with such people, a noble people, a people that love life? The Hellenes, the Romans, the Hindus of old, the Aryans. How would we deal with such a people? The barbarians of Europe. Well, let's think about it. If you can't deal with the man, then would not seducing his weakest point, his female, his child, would not the seduction of them be our preferable choice of assault? And instead of dealing with them directly using uh, honesty, using warfare, using manly confrontation, would we not use the more feminine, the more effete, the more insidious, the more indirect, the more duplicitous method of seducing his children, like I said, his female? Because once you take a man's female away from him, once you seduce her away from him, then what you take away from him is his destiny. You take away his future. Once you seduce a man's child, you eradicate his future, because that's what a child is. It is the continuance of a man's life. It is a future perpetuated. Once you do that, then you don't really have to deal with the man himself. You can let time do all the work. You don't need to confront the man or his tribe. All you do is seduce his weakest point. The same way Rome was taken down by infecting the lower strata of its power. You seduce its weakest point, and then you let time do the work, and you wait, and you reinforce your seduction, your brainwashing, and you continue to manipulate and increase the pressure upon this weakness. And then you watch it all crumble down. And this is what is occurring now. This is a tribal war. This is why when I come across these MRAs talking about turning their backs and all that crap, I know that I'm dealing with cowards, people that are feeding into the very strategy that this infection wants to produce. There's nothing better than males dropping out of the scene, secluding themselves in a room and playing video games, being these gigolos who are shooting blanks. That is sex with no purpose, sex with no meaning, sex with no creation, no procreation. There's nothing better than that. Because, and I repeat, this is a war like no other.